Hello and welcome to the SJPC cast. You have Skylar today, and with me is Varun from House Sacramento. Thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to kind of lead us in because Varun's here to talk about our big ticket item this week. But before we get to that, just to run you through kind of what we flagged for the rest of Tuesday. There are no county meetings tomorrow. Just city council. They canceled law and legislation as well. So there's a 2 p.m. city council meeting and a 5 p.m. city council meeting. There's nothing really super wild going on at the 2 p.m., but I did make a couple of flags. All of my flags for this are on consent, which means that they're part of a big list of items that are all going to get voted on together. And usually those are the ones where they stick to things they're not really planning on talking about and that they think will be like uncontroversial and not really worth spending the time on. And usually they're pretty, sometimes they try and sneak some stuff in there, but usually it's pretty spot on with that. But the ones I did want to kind of point out, they're establishing the rental housing inspection program, reserve project and policy. So they're going to basically they're dedicating resources to it to make sure that it sticks around and also that it drains less from the general fund. I kind of really only flagged this because I think a lot of people don't even know that the rental housing inspection program exists, and it is a resource for tenants, and it is something that it's a tool in your shed if you are a tenant who is being taken advantage of by your landlord. So that's kind of why I flagged that one. The next one is the City Motel Shelter Program Support Services with Step Up on 2nd Street. This one is very strange. It looks like they want to give some more resources to this program, but they're also winding it down. This is also on consent, so they're not really going to talk about it, and it's probably just going to pass. But I flagged it just because, like, in my humble opinion, anytime there's a sentence that has the words homeless services and winding down in the same sentence is worth paying attention to what they're actually talking about. So that is why I flagged that one. And I'll follow up about kind of my takeaways on that next week. They also are doing their successor labor agreements, their MOU, Memoranda of Understanding, and the citywide salary schedule. So this will be where they're going to decide how like the exempt employees and a bunch of different employees, like what they'll be paid and kind of what the raise situation is going to be like. It's pretty non-controversial. There's always a little bit of controversy around giving people raises when the city's in a budget deficit. But these are not the council members themselves or something like that is usually a little more controversial. So those are kind of my main flags for the 2 p.m. Now, the 5 p.m. is a very short meeting. There's only one discussion item, and it's the general plan and zoning consistency, the missing middle housing, and the Senate Bill 79 workshop. And this is what Varun has joined us to talk about. He's with Housing Sacramento, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to just kind of get an expert in here, have him talk to us about what densification is, why it matters, what is missing middle, Senate bill, the whole 9 yards. So, from where I guess let's start with what is the concept of housing densification and like why is it important for a city like Sacramento?
Yeah, so we've two big things that are happening in our world around us. One is we are trying to house people. So in case you, as an individual, don't struggle with rent, that's fantastic. In case you have purchased your house, that's amazing. But I think the reality for most people, younger people, people who are struggling financially, is that the cost of housing has been rising for a very long time. That meme that says the rent is too damn high is a reality of many people's lives. And you could argue that one of the reasons that costs of housing is rising is because we have created a pretty difficult condition for developers to build housing that is smaller. We've been incentivizing. You probably see ads all the time for houses that are 2,500 square feet, 3,000 square feet. When you look at Zillow, that's kind of pretty much the only housing that's available, single family houses. Or on the other end, you see these massive apartment buildings that have 500 units. And for some reason, if you've walked around any other city in the world outside the US, you see that there's like space in the middle for creating housing that is, in the middle of these two, either, you utilize an entire lot or you have a small matchbox amongst a large apartment building. And that's where this word missing middle housing comes from. And so another part of the second side of this is that we've been expanding our cities wider and wider, and our dependence on cars has been increasing a lot. That creates not only a crazy amount of pollution, it just really degrades our quality of life. We're not close to each other. We're not close to services. We're not close to grocery stores. We can't walk to places. Our dependence on these machines and gas and pollution just rises so much. I think there's a universal consensus that we want to live closer to other people and other happenings. That is not just better for us as individuals, but it's better for cities. Cities are going broke building infrastructure that just keeps expanding outwards. And for what? For individual families to have massive backyards. But you gotta realize that I never want to, and nobody should ever criticize individual home buyers for those decisions which developers cater to, because they are told that the best investment in the world is these single family homes they'll appreciate. So it's seen as an asset class, not just like a housing element for themselves, like just a solution to housing. And the second thing is, so yeah, they're told that's a good asset, and that's kind of the only option they're really given in the market for ownership. So um, what missing middle as an idea, which was I think born in the last 2 decades, says is that there's room for housing that's in the middle of these two, where ownership is an opportunity, where apartments or condos can be seen as something. Condos are basically apartments that you can buy. That's an option. Apartments in general are option. But like, why do we have to only build housing that is, single family lots or massive buildings? And so anything that is now imagine having a single family lot which has 4 or 5 apartments on it, or 6 apartments, 10 apartments, 15 apartments, and you go like, wow, that's an interesting idea. These lots are big enough in reality. And what was preventing this historically was zoning. Zoning said you can only build a single family home here, or zoning said this is commercial C2, you can only, or rather, the best way to use this lot and the way the city would enforce it was by saying you need to have certain dwelling units per acre, which is how many apartments can you stuff on this lot. So now the city in 2024 passed something called the Missing Middle Interim Housing Ordinance. Missing Middle Housing Ordinance, it was an interim ordinance. The beauty of that is that they abolished the idea of a single family zoning entirely. It was one of the most progressive, beautiful decisions made. And what it said is any single lot, any parcel in the city that's zoned for under certain residential single family home zonings can be used to create multiple units. And there's a bunch of conditions and bunch of like restrictions on what you could do, how much you can put on a single lot. But this was opening the door to a beautiful future where we can imagine streets where you had 20 odd families stay, is now a street where you can have 100 families. The infrastructure can support it. We also got rid of parking minimums. This was one of the ways you would allow lots to have more units. So we're moving away from let's live far, let's depend on cars, to let's build walkable cities. Let's have access to services. Let's have access to grocery stores. Let's have access to childcare. Let's have access to adult care, senior care. I think that's like it's inevitable that we want to go there. I think it's unquestionable that that's the shared intent of everything we want. How do we get there now? City passed this interim ordinance, and we're finally trying to put it into code. And that's a planner's way of saying we want to permanently lock it into city law. So now it's not just a testing ground, it's not an experiment. It is what we will be doing in the future. And so what the city is doing in what you said will be a very short item. It certainly won't be a short item. It'll be a very contentious item, and a lot of people having a lot of opinions. Is they're saying, how do we translate our learnings from the past 2 years and put something permanent? And in doing so, they're also adding on this thing called SB 79. This was a state law that got passed. It was a huge, huge accomplishment in the world of housing and transit. It was in the works for about 8 years. And what SB 79 is that if the cities of certain density or cities of certain volume or cities of certain population, so just take away small cities and suburbs of California, there's only a few cities that really apply. When you have when you have a rail line, a light rail line of certain frequency, and I think the number was every 15 minutes if you had the line servicing um, people who lived in those areas, you needed to have you needed to, as a city, allow a certain amount of density of housing on lots in a certain distance from that track. So basically what it's saying is that if you're within 200 feet, or if you're in a quarter mile, or if you're in half mile, and these were the three categories of the rail station that has fairly rapid transit, you need to allow a certain amount of density, and mostly that translates to heights. It also is translated to how many units, but it specifically says you have to allow 55 feet, you have to allow 65 feet, you have to allow 75 feet. And so the beauty of that law is that the way it was written and the way the city of Sacramento has adopted it is that there's not much room for local, power change, or groups of people saying, no, this is too much housing or this is too much density. That will be more naturally phased in with this update into the code,
Can
as
I
I
can
talked
I
about. Yeah,
interject just to ask
yeah,
a quick question?
yeah.
Why would people object to taller buildings, or why would people object to more housing and have a problem with that densification?
I think primarily we have this outdated idea that when we look outside our windows, we want to see much more of the sky. That's a fun word. We want to see much more of the sky than we want to see of other structures. We have, I have an opinion on this, and the opinion is we're taught that once we own land, once we own a property, or once we acquire the rights to live in it through a lease or rent, that we now have some unfettered access to the skies that it's a power that the world grants us, which is it's a made up concept. You don't necessarily have it. So anyone who would be opposed to it is basically saying we're opposed to more traffic in our area, which is also not real. This is also a very made up concept. There's never scientific or empirical proof when somebody says that. They're opposed to seeing other people around them. It's a very fundamental selfish attitude of when I bought this property, I was promised, nobody promised anybody anything, but I was promised, that's what is in their head, this freedom of space, and we own the world. It's like Lion King, it's like them looking out and saying, everything you see from here, my
Yeah,
child, is
yeah,
yours.
yeah.
That's what they feel. So that's the one thing, that's the one biggest objection anyone would have, which is this is we don't want more people here. It's the same argument one would make for not wanting more immigrants in a country. It's ours.
So what are they going to be discussing exactly tomorrow? And I read there's a blog that one of your partners wrote and put out. I'll link to it in the show notes. That was like fairly critical of some of the things that are being discussed tomorrow. So I wonder if you could just give us a brief rundown on what they're discussing and kind of where the disconnect is as far as you guys are concerned.
Yeah. So what the city staff, planning department, kudos to that staff. Just an incredibly progressive staff who's doing amazing things for housing in Sacramento. Is they went to the Planning and Design Commission. That's usually the first place they go to before they come to the council, and they said, "Here's what we are thinking. Here's the changes we're thinking about." And the context to all those thoughts is we're not seeing enough housing production based on we loosened our guidelines, we opened things up, but we're not seeing production. So we have to tweak things. And so the Planning and Design Commission gave them a bunch of recommendations. They took some, and often, as the planning staff does, because these are people whose jobs are in planning, they work every day in this, and they understand some details really well. They take a nuanced approach, and they bring this to council saying, here's what the Planning and Design Commission is telling us, here's what we think. Um, at the core of what they're proposing is um, that we're going to make things a lot more liberal and um, allowable for density for certain lots, certain parcels, and we're going to keep curtailing the restricting what we can do on certain other lots. And what they're planning to open up on is far smaller amounts of lots across the city, about 20,000 parcels that are that in the last general plan update were said to be close to transit and places where the city wanted more denser development. And this is called FAR2, or floor area ratio 2. It's basically saying if you have a 5,000 square feet lot, we will allow up to 10,000 square feet of space being utilized for living. And FAR1, which is the more conservative side, is the much more larger number of parcels. Over 80,000 parcels are reserved for FAR1, which is saying if you have a 5,000 square foot parcel, we will allow up to 5,000 square feet of housing space to be used. There's a little nuance that goes into it that's called the sliding FAR scale, but no, you don't need to, we don't need to get into that right now. Now, the core of what the city is saying is we'll allow FAR1 parcels to be more liberal. We're thinking of increasing the heights. And we're thinking of getting rid of the shape that we restricted the houses to be, specifically when it comes to the height. The city historically said, we want all houses in these zoning areas to look like a tent, and it needs to have a certain angle of the roof pitch. But for this FAR2 zone, we're saying, you know what, get rid of the tent. We want more housing here, and we'll not just remove the tent, we'll increase the height. This is fantastic. But in doing so, they suddenly started having a fear. And that fear was if we remove this tent and we allow for height increases, buildings would just get really, really big. And they were planning to increase the height by about 10 feet. So it wasn't a very significant increase. So to curb that potential fear of buildings getting so large that it would freak every neighbor out, they said we're going to introduce something called the width and depth restrictions. And initially they proposed something called wings, which was just we're going to control really what a developer can put. But with width and depth, they're saying we will at some point set an arbitrary number. It's probably not arbitrary, it's probably an opinion of a number, but not scientific. We're going to set a width and depth percentage on how much of your lot you can use. Now, this is on top of what we have that are restrictions, which is setbacks and open space requirements. We already have restrictions, significant restrictions that say you need to pretty much only develop in the sub box of your main box of houses. So in throwing this width and depth restriction, they're giving you some power, they're giving the developer or the builder more power, but they're also taking away some power. For FAR1, it's just all bad news. You can't really properly build a flat third story. You still will get width and depth restrictions thrown at you. And your density is still, it's like if you have 5,000, you can only limit to 5,000. So FAR1, which represents most of the city, is semi-screwed. And the reality, if we just step back from everything we've talked about right now, the core question is, which is, do you only want density in these very, very few areas that have been outlined before? Or do you want housing to be built uh, denser and a little larger than what's being done right now in every part of the city, which allows, growth in all areas that were typically historically seen as my protective land and we can't build here. So that's the core of the debate. And what groups like ours think is that we would rather lose out on these beautiful possibilities of going higher and wider just so that we can protect and build all of Sacramento out more densely. I think that's the more beautiful future. And that's where the contention is, which is, the city's on a different page here than we are.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and coming on kind of last minute to talk us through this. It's always great to have guests like you because this is a ton of information that we can get to our folks about this. So thank you again. Where can we find House Sacramento online?
So we are on housesac.org, but we also, if you just put the word Substack and House Sacramento, you're going to find us. You put Blue Sky and House Sacramento, you're going to find us Instagram, Twitter. We're not great on social, but Substack is where we're posting a lot, and most of our discussions are openly done in on our Discord. So you can easily find the invite code so anybody can join. So come discuss with us, challenge us. Yeah, the sky is the limit.
All right, all right. Well, let's get out of here. Thank you so much, everybody. Stay safe and have a great week, and we'll see you next time.